Okay, thanks everybody. Welcome to today's work session of the MVD. It's December 15th. We're just getting going at 3:10 p.m. And I just got to read a statement. Due to the COVID-19 in the state of emergency, public participation will be offered by webinar. You may join the webinar by going to https://us02web.zoom.us/j/821-322-40639 or by calling 1-646-876-9923 and entering the webinar ID 821-322-40639. All that information that I just read is on the agenda for today's meeting, which can be found at the mvdwater.org website. As a courtesy, as always, we want to thank Merrimack TV. They are also recording this meeting, and it will be posted at their website, on their website at a later date. So that being said, I guess we can, I already indicated the start of the meeting at 3:10, so I guess we can rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Ron, if you want to handle that, since you got the flag in your office.
All right. Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the
republic which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so I think we're starting off this meeting. I know we have a couple of commissioners that are going to join us at a later date, but right now it looks like we've got myself and Paul McLaughlin. Paul, can you tell us where you are calling from and if there's anybody else around you in the room?
Paul McLaughlin, I'm calling from my home in Merrimack on Peter Road. I'm currently alone in the room, but my wife may be in and out with our child.
That's fine. It's a public meeting anyway, so I guess that doesn't matter. I'm Don Preventure. I'm from my home as well, and no one's in the room at the present. So that being said, I think we can turn this over to Underwood, I believe. You want to get it going?
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Don.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. This is a result of, I think, the last commissioners meeting where we asked to meet with you through in a work session format as we advance some of the water supply options report and get some feedback and sort of give you some initial thoughts and findings that where we're at, so that when we deliver the report, we understand or hear some of the thoughts. So from you guys to make sure we're on the right track. And so we're going to throw some information at you today. We've been working on this pretty hard. We're not done. I'd say maybe we're about halfway through, but we felt we were far enough along that we could start showing you some things to see how the staff and the commissioners felt in terms of the direction, because there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of pieces and a lot of options that are on the table. So we felt it would be productive to do it in this format. So we created a work session agenda. I think it's 29 pages. It's a PDF that was sent out last night. Hopefully you have that. We'll be talking from that and walking through it. It's going to be a 3-page agenda with some graphics and some costs and some of the options that we're considering. So I'll assume everybody does have that. First thing that I want to speak about is the water supply demands and production. This is important. We know this is important from what happened in June when we saw some restrictions in our available sources and we saw some high demands. We also know it's important because some of the master planning work that we did 10, 15 years ago identified what we considered the long-term needs in Merrimack, 20-year planning needs for supply, which is what's been driving your work with Emery and Garrett and GZA to look for new sources. And as we went into this infrastructure work and treating some of these wells, We found, as we know, that well number 3, there may be some more cost-effective ways to dealing with well number 3 that's been driving well number 9, which we consider a redundant source. There's been other source options on the table to you. There's Mitchell Woods. There's artificial recharge to supplement the yield at 4.5. And then there's Pennachuck and there's Manchester. And so the district hired us to take a look at all these options to make sure that we're sort of taking them on in the sequence that we need to take them on and looking at the ones that are most cost effective. So we're going to be summarizing that today. But in order to do that, we really need to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what our water supply goals are. Underwood historically has recommended, and I'm looking at the first page of this handout. Stop me if you're not there or you don't have it. Under water supply demands and production, the goal is to reconfirm what, by the way, everything that we're laying out here, there's the action items in terms of what we need is just a nod from the board that you feel like we're going in the right direction. So when we deliver this report, there will be no surprises. So when we list some of these things, that's because it's the direction we're going in. If there's a question on it, I want to respond to it, or we can address it more in a report. But as long as everybody's on board with it, then I think we feel like we're going in the right direction. So stop if you need to stop and ask a question. But I just want to make sure everybody sort of knows our goal here is that it's just getting a nod that we're heading in on the right track. But back in 2014 master plan, which last time this thing was looked at sort of holistically, we had identified what the demands were and what we projected them need to be in 2030. And we are using an average day demand for 2030 of 2.9 million gallons a day. And we are using a max day demand goal in Merrimack of 5.9 MGD. And those are projected demands. Those come from the 2014 report. And we still think and believe that they are the right target. And because we're in a PDF mode, I'm going to be bouncing back to some of the attachments for reference. But the first one I wanted to point to is number 5, PDF page 5. They're numbered in the upper right-hand corner. You might have to rotate it because of landscape view. And if you've got it, it looks like this. And that chart shows the historical max day demands in Merrimack. Some of you have seen this, I believe. The shaded gray line shows from 2002 to 2004 to 2020, the last 16 years, what the maximum day demand was in town. That's the highest day of production we saw in 365 days. And the highest was 2007 and 2008, which was right around 5.4. And so if we use that as a target against our target of 5.9, that means we need 500,000 gallons a day of water. So that's an important number because that's what we're searching for. So that's always been the case. It's always why you've been chasing new water, whether it's Mitchell Woods, AR, or other sources. But unless people feel otherwise, that continues to be the direction and the target numbers that we're using. We know we're going into some conservation discussions. We know we're going into some rate structure changes that may impact this, but for the purposes of this study, that's what we're using. If you flip to the next chart, PDF page 6, I know this is also on your minds. That's on ours too. You take the available sources that you have. You have well number 3 right now, which we're looking to replace as a redundant well. I don't want to use the word replacement, but we're looking to provide redundancy to that well with well number 9. We have well number 2. These are stacked. So well number 3 is the green bar on the bottom, the green box on the bottom. Then we have well number 2, well number 4, 5, and well number 7, 8. If you stack them, if they're all producing and chugging along at their rated capacities of 100%, you meet our current max day demands of 5.4. That's our available supply. That's what we have in our toolbox right now, 5.4. The dashed box above it, I know this has come up at times, represents Pennachuck Waterworks. So that if you use that dash box, we can actually produce 5.9 MGD with Pennachuck available to us, okay? Actually more than that, sorry. The 5.9 represents that dashed line. But with Pennachuck, we exceed it. Okay, so that's why we've always recognized Pennachuck as sort of there for us as we look at, as we deal with new sources and so forth. One of the challenges we saw in June and recently was, though, that sometimes the wells aren't always producing 100%, and that's what's represented on the right-hand side. So let's take in what we think is the current capacities, the current uses, or for other reasons they're just producing less, showing that there's a smaller total available capacity. On the right-hand side, on the bottom right, if you add AR and Mitchell Woods to your, these are to scale. For everybody who's looking at this is to scale. So if you take those boxes of Mitchell Woods and AR and you put them up on top, you can actually see that they do sort of start providing the needed sources that we have, or they provide additional source that we need, I should say. Okay, so that gives you a little background on that. There's two more charts. I'm not going to go through them, but on page 7 and 8, these charts you've seen before. These sort of show what happened in June of this year because of the loss of wells 4 and 5 and the loss of Pennachuck and the high demands due to the drought all coinciding. We ran into this problem where we had to jump into conservation. You've seen these charts before, and it sort of gives you an indicator of what happened there graphically. And it's important to remember that we never really saw, even during all that time, we never saw more than 5 million gallons a day demand. Okay, so it's still under our target of 5.9. With everything that happened in June, we were still under what our target was. The problem really was the source. We knew 4 and 5 was down, and we unfortunately lost Pennachuck due to some short-term challenges there. That's what partly caused the problems. Okay.
Can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Just to say that Wolf's joining the meeting. Hi.
All right, let the record show Wolf joined in at 3:22 or 21. I don't know how long you were there.
Just 22.
Keith, I don't know if it would be helpful, but I do have the PDF that you sent out, and I did rotate the figures and things in here. So if you want me to put it on the screen, if others don't have that in front of them, you can do that if you want. I'm just throwing it out there if somebody doesn't have it in front of them.
Yeah, and Dawn, I should have probably done it myself because I have it up as well, and maybe it'll be easier if I do it just because I can move around to what I'm talking about. Should I do that?
I don't know, Wolf, there was a package that was emailed earlier today. I don't even know if you got it or not. It was like a supplemental packet for Keith's presentation right now, like a 29-page PDF file. You should have received it last night, maybe around 4:30, 5 o'clock, with the agenda.
From me.
Keep going. I'll see if I can find it.
The sun is setting over here in Portsmouth, so kept seeing a glare. All right, that's just a little bit of a background. So I think for the purposes of this, we'll assume that we're still targeting 5.9. We think it still makes sense. That gives you the background of why we're doing it. We looked at those supply and demands. I'm going to share my screen now, if that's okay. That way everybody says I can't, though, so I would need permission to do that, unless you want to do it, Dawn.
I got you. Let's see.
Okay.
How do I do that?
Can you go to the right corner of Keith?
Ah, there we go.
I think it just would be share.
Well, she's
It looks like I can if you want me to. Want me to
Sure.
try?
Can you hit more?
This is mute.
It says I'm disabled.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, good. More.
Did you right click? Just right click on his profile picture or on his camera?
It's not offering it. Why is that?
Can you right click on his profile?
Same thing, spotlight, video. Maybe I'll make you a host. Will that do it, Keith?
Probably.
All
Oh,
right.
hang on.
Okay. How about now?
Uh-huh, that works.
Okay.
Okay. Folks see that?
Yep.
All right, this is page 2 of the handout, so you can follow along here or follow along on your own packet. We just went through page 1. I'm going to get into the meat of it here real quick because we'll look forward to the discussion part. For the supply options that we're considering, we categorized them in three ways. The new wells, the new well number 9, which is redundant to well number 3, we're not considering a new source. It's really right now, and talking with Emery, Garrett, and GZA, they can correct us if it's wrong. Right now, that they're seeing as a redundant well, a mechanical redundancy, but not necessarily additional yield out of the aquifer. So we don't see that as additional supply. We will be working to keep well number 3 available to you in terms of an emergency if something happened to well number 9, so you'd have that redundancy, but it doesn't really add supply. The other option that we were asked to look at was piping water down to from Manchester down to wells 4 and 5 to actually run it through the treatment plant for PFAS removal or reduction. So we don't see that one as a redundant supply, as a new supply either, because right now the treatment plant is really only sized for the 870. And so that there's not really the ability to expand the ability. Well, we didn't at this point carry the costs to expand that treatment plant because frankly, just running the pipe down there will show you it's probably cost prohibitive. So we'll see that one may get eliminated, but those two are sort of redundant sources. The other two there are the important ones in terms of new supply anyway. And there's 2 we consider here. We consider the sustained supply options listed here. There's 4 of them. We consider 3 in the peak emergency options. And some of them have subtle differences, but also significant cost differences. The important thing to remember and the way we're viewing sustained and these peak emergency options is that sustained options, we consider that they're available to you anytime. They're guaranteed to you as long they're guaranteed to you. You purchased them, you built them, they're yours. Those are, if we're talking about Pennachuck and Manchester, mean a wholesale arrangement where you actually purchase the rights to the water, like they were a source to you. That's why we call those a wholesale agreement or a wholesale arrangement. Mitchell Woods is also falls in that category. The reason we actually show Mitchell Woods in both categories is because Mitchell Woods has withdrawal limitations. Whether it's used year round, it's only got a certain amount of production available to you. If it's used during the peak seasons or when you only want to use it seasonally for a few months, it actually has a higher peak value to you. So we kind of looked at it both ways. And then the other sustained option we have is AR at wells number 4 and 5, because the idea there is to increase the yield at the well due to the recharge of the aquifer. So the peak emergency options are kind of what you already have with Pennachuck and Manchester. We call them the retail options. You're technically an emergency or user, sort of in the retail realm. If the water's available and they can provide it, they will, but they're not obligated to. We saw that with Pennachuck this summer. They had a mechanical issue and, they got it fixed and then they provided you the water, but there was no obligation on their part to do that. As a good neighbor, they do. But that's the difference between wholesale and retail arrangements. The retail arrangements are cheaper to you up front. They may cost you a little bit more when you use it, but they're also not guaranteed. And then Mitchell Woods, who I just mentioned, is the other peak emergency. If we consider Mitchell Woods a peak shaver, which is a lot of what we've been thinking about as Mitchell Woods, using it in the summer, it would be considered on this peak side as well. So it's important to know that those pros and cons of each of these as we sort of lay out the options. So all the options are laid out here. There actually turned out to be a lot more options we were considering than we thought, but there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 options. And a lot of them are sub options that either included PFAS treatment or didn't, because some of the options we're actually looking at here don't include PFAS treatment. We have some water quality data on Pennachuck and Manchester. So we looked at, a Manchester connection with PFAS treatment and a Manchester connection without PFAS treatment, because they actually have levels that they're detectable, they exist, but they are below the standard. So for each of these options, it indicates which ones have PFAS treatment and which ones don't. And it also considers the capacities that we're considering as added for these options. New well number 9, we already talked about that being a redundant well at 800 gallons a minute. And then we have Mitchell Woods that's either sustained at 200 or peaked at 300 gallons a minute. One has PFAS treatment, one doesn't. And then artificial recharge is also the same way. It will provide some additional peak capacity to you. Ultimately, that would turn it into a reliable year-round source at 870. And right now, it can only technically or officially be peaked out at 620. And that would be an additional 245. So right down the gamut here, and then the rest of these options with Pennachuck and Manchester, we looked at those at about 1 million gallons a day, 700 gallons a minute. So there's a lot there, but here's where I think it gets important, and here's where I think it sort of boils down to the pieces of the discussion. And we can look at water quality if you like. It is attached in one of the tables. But what we did here is we started putting capital costs to each of these options and then ranked them in terms of dollars per gallon. So we tried to normalize them in some way to saying, okay, each one of these has a little bit different of a source available to it. So a $6 million project may not be the same as it may look worse than a $3 million project, but if it provides twice as much water, then technically there are going to be similar options. So this table takes a stab at that, showing roughly the rank of where they would fall out. A Pennachuck retail arrangement, we show a capital investment here, and I can explain to you what that is, but it has 1 million gallons of water, so it's basically going to turn into about $2 per 1,000 gallons for that source. The last column, we took a stab at present worth. That present worth number is a 20-year present worth, but it also considers using that sustained yield or the yield that we talked about for every day for 20 years. So it's not a number that's reality. It's just a number for baseline comparison purposes. So that number presumes you would have been using Pennachuck connection every day, 1 million gallons a day for 20 years. But at least it gives you a way to compare the two. And so these retail arrangements are cheaper. These emergency retail arrangements with Pennachuck and Manchester are cheaper, right? Because we're not buying the guaranteed rights. So they are, they do show as with the lower cost options. And then the next one we see is well 9. We already talked about that being a redundant supply, but it does show us that it's a cost-effective solution. Pennachuck wholesale arrangement, that starts costing more because we would have to purchase the rights. And again, if you remember, the wholesale arrangement gives us the rights to the water permanently, consistently, and reliably, but it's also 3 times the money. And then we have Mitchell Woods falling out here. If you notice, Mitchell Woods is actually 2 slots out of order. It should be moved down to 2 spaces just below 3A if you want to rank these in a dollar per gallon basis. And then we have another wholesale arrangement with Manchester without PFAS treatment. Those are quite expensive because to use it reliably, consistently, and system-wide, we started by saying we need a pump, we need chemical feed to convert back to chlorine if we're going to do it that way. And I know one of the things we're going to be looking at is the possibility or potential of converting to chloramine system-wide, probably not the direction we're going to go. So in this scenario, we just calculated out a chemical feed system to be able to convert to chlorine so that you could get, put it into the entire system. And then the purchase rights for a wholesale arrangement, it's actually quite expensive to buy the rights. I think they're $3.88 per gallon right now in Manchester. Both Manchester and Pennachuck are willing and capable of providing water. They have it, and they'd be willing to sell it on a wholesale arrangement if you'd like. The advantage of wholesale arrangements is it's a little cheaper on the unit price, but it's more costly up front. They get a little bit more expensive on the Manchester options, and if you start looking at PFAS treatment, and so that's why you'll see those other options for Manchester at 4C and 4D getting a little bit more expensive. And then the Mitchell Woods, 2B on the last one, Mitchell Woods, that's actually Mitchell Woods with PFAS treatment. I don't believe there is PFAS data on that, or if there was PFAS data, it was not non-detect. But we did cost out what Mitchell Woods would look like if PFAS treatment was required. There are work plans that start showing some of this, and we can look at those momentarily, but I would like to pause for a second just to see if there's any questions in what I've put out so far, because I'm sure there is.
Any other questions out there? If not, the one question I have is this, again, we're just looking at capital costs here, correct? We're not looking at like operational costs after the capital costs are expended.
Just to answer that, the 20-year present worth is an attempt. The last column on that table is an attempt to look at operating costs as well.
Okay.
So it converts a 20-year operating cost to a present worth capital cost, meaning it's equal to capital cost up front today. If I had to put that much money away today, I could operate it for 20 years. So it does consider operating costs.
So you might be able to break that down into operating costs of dollars per gallon per day as well. I know there was some assumptions made that we were using Penachuk on a continual basis, but I'm wondering if there's a way to separate out what the cost per like gallon per day that we would get, or million gallon per day or something like that.
Or total gallons, I think we could do. And maybe I could have Luke take a stab at that. But if I take that 20-year present worth and divide it by the total amount of gallons you benefited over those 20 years, I would have a dollar per gallon that
Right.
included O&M.
So are each one of these line items somehow, it must have an assumed gallon per day demand that it's supplying, right? That you could normalize that into a dollar per gallon per day.
Yep.
So I'm thinking maybe for the final report, if you wanted to add that column in there possibly.
Yep. No, I think that's good. We can do that.
Okay. Because I think that's an important number, because I know, the capital costs are something that we swallow one time basically, and then from there on, it's more of operational costs that are the long-term things that we want to look out for basically. So I think that would be definitely important. That'd be great if you can do that. Any other questions from anyone, or want to have Keith just move on?
I got a quick question for Keith, and we chatted about it a little bit, just for the purposes of the 20-year present worth discussion, which I think is very valid. For the artificial recharge, there are other tangible, but maybe not definable exactly in terms of things that you would benefit from. So, that may not, or may, and maybe Keith can answer this, if it's in the $6.2 million net worth over 20 years. One is that we believe that if you use artificial recharge, you're going to diminish and dilute the sodium and chloride, which would be something that is important as the sodium and chloride levels continue to rise in that area. And two, I think we're going to diminish and dilute the amount of PFOA or PFOS in the groundwater, which would improve the length of time the charcoal would last. In other words, you would diminish the amount of change out. And this is something that we're doing in the city of Dover, where we think ultimately that artificial recharge might even take the PFAS down below, reduce it by levels of substantial levels by maybe 100 ppt. And so I just wanted to leave that out there, that there may be some improvement in that number when you see see benefits from the reduction in charcoal use, and the improvement of the water quality from sodium chloride. So,
And to that point, there may be some cost avoidance or cost reductions in operating costs or cost avoidance in dealing with sodium chloride that aren't reflected in these capital costs of the operation and maintenance. So that would, if those play out to be true, then that would make AR look better yet.
correct.
Do you think you would be able to like assess like a 50-year replacement cost in that too? I don't know how. I mean, if you look at artificial recharge, there's really nothing to it after it's installed. There's really power, and there's really no other significant operational costs I can think of, other than just replacing the infrastructure for the artificial recharge in a number of years in its design life. So I got to think each one of these options probably has, you have a capital cost, and I would think you could proportion that capital cost over the design life and kind of come up with an annual, I guess, contribution we'd have to make to meet that replacement cost over the design life. Is that normally how you do something like that?
Sometimes we consider the future capital costs. So if you have a design life of 50 years, we can bring that forward and say that should play into it. So you have to redo your assets after 50 years. Right. They tend to be minor in terms of this, so we tend to ignore them or neglect them, especially if the life is 20 years or longer, which it would be. But it is something we can consider. Normally I don't see it change things too much. It's really the annual operating costs that have the biggest impact, so we tend to focus on those. You're right on this one. The AR has some of the lower operating costs that we looked at. It's really just energy and probably some water quality monitoring and sampling that you would have to do. But it's compared to the other options, it's pretty low. The challenge with the AR, and I do want to show you this. And if you go to, I'll move along here to that graphic. It's in your packet as well, but
actually, Keith, I wanted to latch on to what Jamie said.
Yeah.
If we were to overlay the mix ratio of AR provided water versus naturally occurring recharge water, right? I'm not even sure if we can do that, but I guess our pump rates, the way we protected them would be giving us that ratio. And we also apply the ratio of the PFAS concentration of the Merrimack River and what we expect to see after that recharge water was filtered by sediment and soil, and comes out with possibly a different PFAS concentration, right? Is there any way for us to predict how much this will extend the lifetime of the filters, of the filter medium?
I mean, we can't. Jamie had suggested to me, I'll just, if the PFAS concentrations are reduced in half due to the AR, that would give us a basis for taking a look at the life of the carbon. And maybe it wouldn't be twice as long, but let's just say it's something a third longer or something, or half, at least 50% longer life. Then we can factor that in as a cost reduction in that option, so that we'd actually see a cost savings in the O&M because of that, and see what that does for a calculation. That would help AR look better, or that would help rank AR in a better than it would without that consideration. And I think it's a real valid point.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that calculation.
Okay.
And I think, Keith, probably the starting point would be to say, let's cut it in half and see where that goes. Because anything beyond, I think that's a reasonable just back of the napkin. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Beyond that is gravy, right? So I think that would be the basis for which you might consider that. Because I fully expect that if we're going to have that much, available recharge, we're going to potentially double the yield. We should be in a position where that would occur. So I
Well,
think
you
I
could
agree
actually
with that.
do a mass balance on that, right? You know how many gallons per minute you'd be taking out
Right.
of we're in a
You
concentration.
can, but it's not, one would think that if you had a 360-degree input here, you could probably do that. But in this case, we're going to not have that necessarily.
Yeah.
So, but from the sodium and chloride, interesting, I think that's, well, I won't go down that path, but anyways, I think you're right. But I think this, from the purposes of this planning study, I think it would be good if, I think if we cut it in half, that would be a reasonable target. See what happens.
Okay.
Yep.
You're looking at a site plan of the wells 4 and 5 area. You got wells 4 and 5 here on the top, wells 5 on the bottom, the new treatment plant roughly in this area. The AR basins that Jamie's group has laid out are up on the top of the hill. I think there's actually 2 basins here, but that's the area. There has been identification in the old gravel pit of a possible future basin, so at least we're planning and considering for that. And the costing we've calculated out was this transmission main up the hill underneath the tracks with a pumping station down above the floodplain along the banks of the river on land you currently do not own, although Ron tells me he has a good, we have an opportunity to work with obtaining the land we might need for that. And then we have an intake that at this point we're extending out about 180 feet into the river. We don't have any bathymetry. We don't know much about the river bottom there. But what we really the only things we really know is roughly what the normal water levels are and what the flood stages are. But we did base the first cut of this intake based similarly to what Penachuk did a few years ago when they put their intake in. Of course, they put in a much larger one that was much more significant in terms of needing reliability to supply the city of Nashua. But we may not need to be as deep, but that's how we came up with what we came up with. For the purposes of this, because we're only working on limited information, we used similar configuration to what Penachuk used. Smaller pipe, but similar configuration. And if you look at the next, there's actually on sheets, this is only for reference, but on sheets 15, and sorry, oh no, that's not it. I'm sorry. So sheets, this is it. 17 is an existing conditions profile that shows the river. It's a little maybe hard to follow, but what happens, what's important to see here is there's the water surface elevation here, which is around 98 feet in the river. To be up above the floodplain, we're up about 120, and to be maybe 10 or 15 feet, I think we're carried 15 feet of depth right now. The intake would be down about 80 feet. So that's about 180 feet into the river, 15 to 18 feet deep. And so it's quite a significant undertaking to deal with that pump station. So it's not, the capital investment on this one is quite high. In the case of Penachuk, they had sheeting out in the river to install this thing, and then deep dewatering pits to actually make it work. And I think they even had an existing pumping station that just had to modify. We don't have anything down there, so it's not an inexpensive project. If you're interested, the next there's the floodplain information. Here's an intake. This is a Dover intake that we did on sheet 20. This shows you what we did in Dover. Dover's a very different animal. We're just sharing it with you, but it was a shallow river that's only about a foot or two deep. But this gives you an indication of the intake screens that are required. I'm not going to go through those there if you want to look at them. But the one that's really interesting is sheet 21, which is the actual Penachuk intake and the depths. When you study this, how deep they were and how far out in the river they were to do that. So again, we may not need to do it exactly like Penachuk did, but it gave us a little bit of a basis to do that. And you all know that the Penachuk one went in Merrimack. This is in Merrimack River in Merrimack, upstream of the wastewater treatment facility. Merrimack's treatment facility.
Keith, did you talk to Penachuk as far as some of the cost for that? I know it's a little different than, quite different what we're
Yeah.
doing or thinking of doing proposed.
I talked to John Bovair last year. Mike talked to him most recently again, I think last week or a few weeks, last month maybe.
Okay.
And so we did get their bid, their pricing. We know what their pricing was. And Mike, maybe you remember what that part was.
Yeah, I talked to John, I don't know, week and a half ago, and I'm still waiting. He was going to see if he could get me a bid tab, or better yet, a schedule of values on the contractor breakdown for that project. He gave me, I believe, I know if I have that here, he gave me an estimate that what are we carrying right now on that one, Keith?
$5 million for everything.
Yeah. And I believe, yeah, he gave me the cost of what they had, and then we added in our percentages and so forth. But I still want to get the more detailed report, which he just hasn't gotten to me yet.
And did you happen to also speak with Jamie about the remaining engineering and modeling costs that were included?
Jamie did a cost estimate a while ago. I don't know if that was earlier this year, Jamie, or last year, but his earlier estimates were a little bit less, but they did have some of the hydrogeo that we're carrying. So right now, I think we're carrying about $200,000, which I probably need to do a little bit more to confirm with Jamie that it's right. But for now, that's what we're carrying. So we are carrying it. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm still trying to remember. I wasn't sure if I have the number correct or not, but I know there was an artificial recharge application that we filed a couple years ago. And I want to say, my memory serves me right, it was for something that was going to cost like $800,000. Is that correct? I think I asked about this before. I don't remember what the answer was, but I just thought there was a really high number associated with this. And I wasn't sure exactly what it covered, but if we need it, I just want to make sure that it's included if that's something we need. I don't know if you remember that specifically,
Yeah, so,
Amy.
yeah, in the, we had put in that, I believe, so we had some temporary AR basin constructions, we had the AR pilot testing, we had hydrogeologic assessments, and we had permitting. So something in that order, I think we end up putting in for that part of it, $700,000 or $800,000. So that's the number that I sent to the district in January.
Yeah, so I guess my point is if that's something we need, I just want to make sure we capture it in this cost estimate.
Yeah, I think they did, didn't you, Keith?
We did. And I think, we're certainly, right now, our estimate is a little bit higher than what Jamie had carried a little bit ago. So I think we're probably a little bit more conservative, but I think we learned a little bit more about the intake structure. And so, and I think you've got some investment done already. And if you want us to capture that too, we can. The normalized cost curves we're finding, though, if we actually rounded up on some of our costs too, because we're still early in the planning, but we're finding that if we use $4.5 million or $5 million for a capital cost, in terms of ranking, the things didn't change the rankings that much. We're going to be updating those costs. In the bottom of that table, you noticed I put a note there that says these costs will change, because I think they were close enough to have a discussion with you right now, but we still have some work to do to refine them as we develop these. So we'll do that, Dawn. We'll make sure we've coordinated with Jamie to capture the right costs. But we felt we were close enough for the costs discussion today.
That sounds good.
Okay. The other thing about the intake is, and because this is another reason why right now there has been some discussion. I know Ron always talks about this, is if we're going to, and Jamie and others have talked about this, but if we're going to put a pipe into the river, let's make it sized for something in the future. We may only need 500 gallons a minute today for AR, but if there's ever going to be a need or want for surface water and surface water treatment, this thing should be sized appropriately. For the purpose of this analysis, we're keeping it down sized and considered kind of for the AR, because that's what we're trying to compare. But you know, the cost would go up again if we decided we wanted to have this thing available for 4 million gallons a day. That would be a different animal. Right now, we're looking at it at about 1.5 million gallons a day, just as a starting point. So to help keep the cost down and not make it bigger than what's needed for the AR. So that's another future discussion. If we end up going with AR, then there's going to be a discussion on whether or not we want to add some investment to make it built bigger for a long term.
And I don't know how much detail I'm looking at here, but it looks like those contours that are from beneath the river surface. Is that right? Is
Those
that like
are,
the
yeah.
center line of the river?
Yeah, this would probably be the thread of the river.
Yeah. And then the
And
pump station is just on the edge of the river. So
Pump station's right here.
would that have to be above the flood stage, or can that flood out if there's a massive flood?
Yeah, I mean, we would start by designing it outside of the floodplain. It could be designed that, you know, with submersible equipment that you could keep it in the floodplain, maybe keep it submersible. So I think some of those details would be worked out.
Okay.
But there's disadvantages to submersible pumps too. But yeah.
Okay.
This one, the pump station itself, all the electrical controls and everything is above the 100-year floodplain. Water would probably, those two structures you see between the pump station and the river, those could be flooded under 100-year flood. And one of those is a very deep structure. I think it's about 40 feet deep that goes down. And John told me that they did design that if they ever needed to put a pump station on top of that. So I believe that is right up near the 100-year flood elevation.
Yeah. And you carried costs of the bathymetric surveys that would need to be done of the river bottom and all that stuff?
Yeah, they'd absolutely have to be done.
Yeah. And that's in your cost estimate, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, in round numbers, I mean, right now we're carrying, 20% engineering, design, and construction phase. So we'll coordinate further with Jamie. We owe you a 30% design on this, so that will identify those longer term needs and a little bit stronger or better refined cost opinion. So yeah.
Right.
And, not only bathymetry, but we'll probably need some borings. We'll need to know what the river bottoms itself are like too.
Okay.
All right. I want to go back to this table. What we're leaning towards, and again, we haven't written this recommendation, but I want to lay it out there just to start getting reactions, because we're hopeful that we're on the right track with things. But what we're leaning towards is that we see the Pennachuck and Manchester connections remain. They're important to you. I think they're needed for emergencies. We've benefited from them before. They make sense to keep. There may be some appropriate capital improvements that would help those be more reliable and more consistent. So you're going to see us probably suggest that we only stick to a retail arrangement with these guys. It's not worth, at least at this point, we still think you can make water supply decisions internally to Merrimack at not only lower costs, but in your control, and they're the things that you want to do. So we're not at this point leaning towards a wholesale arrangement with these guys. But there may be some capital investments that we're going to suggest for the Pennachuck and Manchester in a capital plan going forward, so that those things can be more reliable and more consistent. One of the things that happened in Pennachuck is that, as I understand it, and I've heard different stories, but when I talked to Don Ware directly, they lost a pump in their booster pumping station. I heard stories too that there was a valve restriction, but the latest information I got is they actually lost a pump. Milford was demanding greater water. Their Route 101A and Nashua itself was demanding greater water, so they couldn't keep up with everything that with the remaining pumps they had in service. So Merrimack was the one that couldn't be provided. And so one of the thoughts was, well, maybe it's worth helping them beef up their pumps. It's just an idea. to provide more reliable water in those emergencies, because it's not a source issue for them. It was a delivery issue. Same with Manchester. Right now, the grade lines are lower. To feed the rest of Merrimack, we'd need a pump. You'd need some chemical feed. So if we wanted that to be a long-term, reliable emergency connection, there may be some appropriate capital improvements. So you'll see some sort of recommendation on that. But we're suggesting sticking to the retail arrangements, the current emergency arrangements, because you have some other sources available to you. Stick the course with well 9. It makes sense. It comes down to AR and activating Mitchell Woods, but we need those for supply. So if we're going to stick to internal supply options in Merrimack, we need them. We have to do Mitchell Woods and artificial recharge if we want to meet that 5.9 with supplies internal to Merrimack. And so that's the direction we've been leaning, and wanted to sort of get some reads on you guys to see if that makes sense. Because as Jamie said, it's not just a cost decision. There's certain policy decisions in terms of we want to provide water using water internally, or we want to provide water that's cheaper, or what. But this is kind of where we're at, and wanted to have a little bit of a discussion with you, because it's more than just dollars and cents. And I know Don and Wolf and Paul will have thoughts, and I want to hear them.
I was just wondering what you just discussed about possibly helping Pennachuck with their end of their infrastructure in some manner. Is that where the capital cost of the Pennachuck retail agreement comes from? I mean, we already have the pump station there at Pennachuck Square. So I think, I don't see what other capital costs would be coming from.
Well, to dive into that one a little bit further, that Pennachuck connection, there's a lot of history there. Some of you may know it, but the original arrangements, or the original approach and agreements between Merrimack and Pennachuck, were to provide water on a wholesale or an emergency basis on Route 3 near Anheuser-Busch. And there was an agreement ready to go, and then I think it just fell through in the 9th hour. But that's where Pennachuck, frankly, would prefer to provide you the water, because that's in their main pressure zone. They don't have to boost the water to get it to you. It works. It's in their main zone, I should say. So they don't have a pump station to get it to you. I think we'd still need to boost it, but it's a more reliable location for them. So if we choose to go back and revisit that, and we haven't right now, we haven't talked about it. We talked about it, Mike, if you remember, probably 15 years ago when we did the original water supply option study, it did come up, but there'd be a pump station involved there. So what Pennachuck suggested, and if they're just offering it as an option, is we have a pump station internal to our system that's short right now in its ability to supply water to that Pennachuck connection at Route 101A. If you help us with that, then we can help you, because we'd have more water available to you. The other thing you need to know on this one is that Milford's looking to Pennachuck to up their water supply needs, so that if Milford actually does enter into an arrangement with Pennachuck for more water, that further reduces the reliability of water to you at 101A. So by investing in that, and I'm not saying it's an easy decision, but that is one that says if you do that, then there's some more reliability and infrastructure to get you the water where you need it.
So they're basically trying to get rid of a bottleneck on the 101A corridor, I would say, it sounds like.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think they'd say they see it as a bottleneck, because they're providing their customers what they need to. But if Merrimack wants to have more reliable water there, then yes, that limitation would need to be corrected.
But shouldn't that be then part of a wholesale agreement? Because I would be uncomfortable in helping with an investment on Pennachuck's end,
Yep.
and then still not having a guarantee.
Yep.
Right, under the retail agreement. So it has to be the one or the other, right? I mean, if we invest actively into their infrastructure, then it should come with a guarantee as well.
Yep.
So I mean, in the end, what we're talking about here is a decision point for the MVD, putting it on the table. Do we want to, continue to exist independently from these other suppliers, or do we want to not, right? And it's a political and strategic question really that we have to ask ourselves. And to me, what I don't really appreciate is to be in the position of being the face to the customer, but not being in control of the water supply. I think that's a very unfortunate position to be, right? Then you're ending up a tier two kind of supplier, and you're not really master of your own fate. But you're still getting all the heat from the customers as far as rate increases or lack of supply, whatever it might be. So I think we got to be very clear with what we intend to do in that regard. Either we need to really switch over hard and make ourselves, reliably dependent on any of the other water suppliers, and then maybe scale back our own infrastructure, right, and really invest into that supply from the other suppliers. But then we'll also, be very clear that, they're the ones that need to deliver and guarantee, and the agreements need to be clear enough that we have some leverage as well, right? Or we really don't follow that path at all and use them as a possible backup, but we rather invest into our own infrastructure. There shouldn't be any path in between, in my opinion. Anything in between is a slippery slope.
And one of the, I sort of tipped our hand as to where we're thinking, because you already have these retailer emergency arrangements, and there's a little bit more steps that could be taken, to your point, Wolf. In order to advance a wholesale arrangement, let's say we decide we want to do that with Penachuk and have the guaranteed water because it's smart or whatever, or to find out that it truly is cost effective, they're going to expect a cost of service study to be done. And that cost of service study will dictate or define whatever capital investments or dollar investments you would have to make into that one. We estimated that in this chart on 5A, and we only estimated it to be consistent with what Manchester would have charged. So we don't know what Penachuk would charge you for that long-term commitment. They would expect a cost of service study. Manchester's different. They have an MSDC. They know what it is. Everybody pays the same. You would too. I used that number for Penachuk. So there is a step that could be taken that says, okay, let's hold on to our retail arrangements right now. Let's pursue the internal ones we have, but maybe we have to invest in that cost of service study, which you'd pay Penachuk for, to find that number, and then have a reassessment and decide that it's still the right way to go or not.
So Keith, that's why the number from Penachuk in the dollars per gallon per day of 347 is lower than the Manchester wholesale agreement at 595. I assume that's because we have some infrastructure we have to build for Manchester to convert from chloramines to chlorine, correct?
And a pumping station, both. Yep.
Right. So this wholesale agreement number doesn't necessarily include, what does that include? A pump station down at DW Highway on Route 3?
For option 5A?
Yes.
That just includes essentially the purchase price and the rights to connect. We might have carried some small improvements to your current pumping station, maybe tie it to SCADA, because now it's more of a reliable, you need it to be a little bit more reliable, but essentially the bulk of that cost is just the rights to buy the water.
So I think the other big difference here is that the wholesale price, I believe, from Manchester is like half the cost of the wholesale price for Penachuk, I think. So I would.
You mean
think that
the rates? You mean
yeah.
the rate? Yeah, and again, Manchester pretty much knows what they'll give you because they have it already defined. Penachuk doesn't. You'll see in the back of this PDF, and I haven't gone through it, and you're welcome to read it, but we can go through it a little bit if you'd like. There's some correspondence from both Manchester and Penachuk on what the rates are or what they would think, but I don't think Penachuk really knows. He gave us some samples of what some of the other wholesale arrangements are, but I think that would be part of the cost of service study to establish what rate you would actually see. It would be lower than the retail. It would absolutely be lower than their current retail rates, but what it is, I don't think we really know.
So that's going to be a little challenging to try to kind of normalize that present worth table I was asking you about, and reducing that down into dollars per gallons per day of ongoing, because that's like a cost we got to pay. That's a recurring cost, and you know, it's not an infrastructure cost, it's the cost of purchasing that water on a wholesale agreement. So that's kind of what I'm trying to factor in, if we can look at those future cost numbers and compare those to these other options, which probably include more of like the replacement costs going forward, I think. Because I think that's where it gets important, again, is beyond the capital costs, is to know, you know, what long-term recurring costs we're going to be looking at. So I don't know if there's a way you can, I don't know if it's possible that we can refine that really at this point or not, you know?
No, the only thing that we'll do, or we can do, is just to say, you know, Hudson is this, or, you know, Milford is this, and that sort of gives us an indication on what we might see. So you're right, it's not a definitive number, but at least it's based in something. And I think based on this discussion, you know, one of the recommendations probably will be there's some interest at least advancing the Penachuk wholesale options as to really what it means. And I think it's been cited to us before that a cost of service study, which they would facilitate, you would have to pay for, would be in the range of $30,000, let's say. So for the cost of, you know, for the dollars we're talking about here, that seems like a reasonable number to spend to find out those answers. So that might be one of our interim recommendations based on this conversation.
And then I don't know if you can get, you know, you got comparisons for Penachuk, like you said, if you look at Hudson and other, you know, wherever they're supplying water now on a wholesale, can the same thing be done for Manchester as well, to try and look at those numbers? I think those numbers are more refined than Penachuk is, right?
Yeah, Manchester's kind of nice, you know, it's a take it or leave it. Here's what it is, like it or not. So you know what you know where they stand.
So even though Manchester's numbers are quite a bit lower than Penachuk's, and I guess I'm just looking at the Penachuk customers, what they pay in Nashua. And I want to say it's like $3.66 or something like that per 100 cubic feet. But it seemed last time I looked at it, I don't know if that's the number they would be offering us wholesale, but it looks like that number from Nashua from Penachuk would be a heck of a lot higher than the, you know, the per gallon cost of water, the rate we'd be paying for Manchester. So I'm just kind of curious. It sounded like you were recommending that we maybe look closer at Penachuk as opposed to Manchester. But if the rate that we're buying the water for is a lot lower over the long run, I'm kind of curious how you arrive at maybe thinking about Penachuk is better for us than Manchester.
Well, only because and I was only looking at this in the emergency peak, and I only wanted to do some of this because that's what our instincts are starting to show, because we're not done, and I wanted to get your reaction. But the reason, Dawn, was there's other costs associated with using that water and the chemical feeds. You know, it's quite a bit of cost associated with converting back to chlorines. We're, you know, in terms of building that chemical feed facility, or vice versa, converting your entire system to chloramines, which also just doesn't make sense. So it's more than just the rate that you would be faced with, unfortunately. If they were a chlorinated system, it might be even better, but they're not.
Okay, you don't have a feel. Penachuk probably didn't indicate that they were thinking of switching to chloramines or anything like that, right?
I don't think I asked them that, but I don't know. Mike's shaking his head no, so.
At least that didn't come up in our discussion.
No.
It was a task, though, I think, on our task list, right, to investigate that, if I'm not mistaken.
With Manchester? Yeah. Yep, it is. And
No, with Penachuk, whether Penachuk is willing to move to, planning
okay.
to move to chloramine.
Well, we'll ask them specifically then, because we haven't yet.
I thought in the last meeting we talked about that. And
Okay.
I agree with Ron. I mean, it kind of reflects in your present worth number, right? While the investment initially at Manchester is almost twice as high, here from 3.5 to 6 million to buy into that wholesale agreement, the present worth is almost only $1 million and 200 apart from each other.
Yep.
So that's probably where your rate comes in, right? Your lower rate is reflecting in there.
Yes.
But again, this is only for a partial supply of Merrimack, right? Not for a complete supply of Merrimack.
That's right. It's based on 1 million gallons a day. The other thing is the water quality, and Manchester is not treating for PFAS. They have low levels, detectable, but low levels. If you looked at PDF page 16, there is water quality data. What we did learn is Pennachuck is treating for PFAS in their existing GAC filter beds. And all they're doing to treat it, as I understand, is just swapping out carbon on a more frequent basis, which is a costly thing, but at least it allows them to treat. There it is, water quality. So we have some water quality data here. PFOA and PFOS in Pennachuck has been less than 5 and 2, or 5 and less than 2. Manchester, similar order of magnitudes. Not a lot of data, but we were able to find some. So it does exist. It is present. But Pennachuck is doing a little bit more to treat. That's why you see the PFAS levels lower than what we knew about two years ago, because they're actively changing out beds. I think they're changing all their beds out every 3 years now, or at least that's their plan.
Yeah, I think that would kind of raise another political question that our customers might not like, or, just looking back at the warrant articles that were approved a couple years ago, or last year, I guess it was. But anyways, that the goal obviously was to have non-detect PFAS in our distribution system. And I understand this is something kind of beyond the warrant articles that we're looking at, but still, nonetheless, I think the customers were expecting that would be the case. So I would just like to make sure, if we ever did pursue Pennachuck or Manchester options without treatment, without PFAS treatment, I mean, that, our customers are okay with the fact that we might be getting 5.4 parts per trillion from Pennachuck of PFOA, and 3.9 parts per trillion of PFOA from Manchester. And obviously that would be somewhat diluted, but again, at the input point where they connect, those users there would probably be seeing more concentrations that are closer to those levels, I think. So I guess what I'm saying is it's probably not a decision I'd want to make without having customer input, maybe a public hearing or some kind of feedback from that. I mean, ultimately, it would be good to have our customers vote, I think, if they want to even entertain this idea or not. And I'm not sure if, what kind of vote that would require. If it's a vote that would have to be best done at an annual meeting. I don't know if it makes sense to just put a non-binding referendum out there to ask the customers what they think about that or something.
Well, it may be, I'm sorry, go ahead, Wolf.
No, go ahead.
Before we go that far, let me ask a wild question. So our booster station at 101A, right, is pretty close to wells 7 and 8. Any of the volume that we're talking about right now that we would buy under a wholesale agreement from Pennachuck would come through that booster station, correct?
Yep.
Ron and engineers here, not knowing the exact pipe configuration, would it be possible for us to route that water over to 7 and 8? And, without running 7 and 8, have it filtered by the filtration plant that we put in place right now at 7 and 8, and then send it into the system?
The disadvantage is it is quite a ways away, Wolf. It's far, at least in terms of laying a transmission main. But the other problem is it doesn't get you new supply. You know, because if you're running, you know, your treatment plant it has a fixed capacity. If you just add more sources to it, the treatment plant still has a fixed capacity, essentially.
Right, and you know, I guess that comes, or that leads into that question I asked earlier, or a statement I made earlier. We might need to think about long term what is cheaper, right? I mean, 7 and 8 are great wells right now, but they're not the highest producing wells in town, right? So are we better off buying more from Pennychuck, right, and filtering it with the infrastructure we put in place? Or are we better off maintaining our own resources? And that's a numbers game and it's, you know, obviously also a strategic decision what the town of Merrimack wants to do. Just saying, you know, I wonder if it's something that we could be. We're trying very hard to make our own wells work, right? And it sounds a little bit treasonous what I'm saying here, right? Obviously, it's not really what I'm looking forward to say. Let's shut down shop on some of our own wells and just buy the water in large quantities from the waterworks that are much larger than MVD is. It's not really something I would favor, but I think we need to have the diligence and look at it too.
Yeah, I think that's what you're trying to do, is be pragmatic and practical, and your solutions is all. You're just trying to do the best thing and have the most reliable water. I would,
well, people are asking that question: why are we running MVD wells? Why are we not buying from other larger neighboring companies that have the infrastructure and supposedly the supply to serve our town, right? Which I'm not sure if I would accept that statement like that, because I know that Pennychuck also had watering restrictions, pretty harsh ones this summer. So that goes to show you they also were running, bottoming out with or topping out, I guess, with their supply. So, but I guess we need to look at that too, so we have at least an answer to that question, right? When we're being asked why we're not doing it, or we're not doing it because it doesn't make financial sense, or it doesn't make logistical sense, or whatever else the answer is.
And we may not be complete in this evaluation, and we may not have all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but I think what we came away with here is Manchester and Pennachuck wholesale arrangements are not that far off in terms of costs, whether, you know, we can dissect it a few more ways and look at it a few more ways. But it gave us a little bit more confidence to say, if we as a decision, as a policy decision, want to stay the course with our current supplies, they're not that much different in terms of costs as per a wholesale arrangement with these other communities. And certainly if these wholesale arrangement with these other communities requiring and needing further PFAS treatment, then our choices are lower. So to some degree, we've started answering that question, Wolf, and that's why we were ready to come forward to you today. And I think, Dawn, on your comment about finding out what people think, I think we'd want to get more information before we start posing questions. There may be financial reasons in the end that we don't want to do this, sort of to Wolf's point, before we even have to ask that question. So the idea of doing that cost of service study in Pennachuck, for example, may put it to bed by finding out that the capital and the O&M costs just aren't worth it.
Keith, let me get a quick question. No matter what happens, if you were to purchase on a long-term agreement with Pennachuck, you'd be purchasing water that have PFOA and PFOS in the water after treatment, correct? There's some levels, they're not treating it to zero.
They aren't. No, there are some levels.
Yeah, so one of the things, I think, to Don's point, maybe to Wolf's too, that I think you'd have to consider is taking this to the district and present the fact that if you were to go that route, you would have to have some consensus on the district that they're willing to accept the change in direction, which is what I think the district has put forth as their goal. Maybe not necessarily achievable at all times, but that the goal was to reduce to zero. So I'm not saying that was correct or whatever, but I think at the end of the day, that's the intent. And I would think that it'd have to go to the district. I don't know, Don, I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was kind of wondering that, right now we've only been using Pennachuck as an emergency situation. So when we need the water, we're going to get the water with whatever water they're delivering to us. And right now, the rest of our own wells are not zero non-detect PFAS, but hopefully by the end of the summer of 2022, all of our own wells should be PFAS free. We should have non-detect PFAS.
Right.
And that was represented as the goal to the customers in March of 2019 when the warrant articles passed. So I almost feel like that was already the directive, that was the goal. Even as low as these numbers are at 5.4 and 3.9, I don't know how. I'd kind of like to get a pulse for how the customer would feel if they come back, with a 92% overwhelming vote that says no, we don't want that. Well, then we know not to pursue it, But I wouldn't want to go against a majority of what our customers are telling us they want. So that's why I'm kind of putting it out there. Is there a way that we can get enough information together and have that decision made? And I don't know that it necessarily needs to be made, in March of 2021 coming up. But I think we want to know sooner than later if this is something that's going to be taken off the table entirely, or something that we can really look at as a long-term solution, is connecting to either Manchester or Pennachuck. It does look like the cost to treat PFAS for those sources are pretty high, obviously, as you would expect. So, when you look at that versus what we can do with our own water, we're probably better off just pursuing our own wells like we have in the past. But again, at some point, I think even our own wells are not going to be enough to keep up with some future demand, and that future might not be too far ahead from us. So we're going to have to make a decision at some point. Do we even continue looking for yet additional wells, knowing in Merrimack that it's almost a surety that we're going to have to treat for PFAS pretty much wherever we are, trying to get our own sources, well sources, or, maybe at that point it makes sense to look at Manchester or Pennachuck and treating that water. But again, if a customer say, you know what, I'm willing to live with a 5.4 or a 3.9 PFOA, then it makes the decision a lot easier. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence on this. I guess my point is, I wouldn't want to make this decision in a vacuum. I kind of want to have some feedback from the customers on this. And I don't know, it would probably just confuse them if we try to put a non-binding sort of referendum question article out there for the March meeting or something. But is there a way we can try to explain what we're talking about here and just get a pulse from the customer to see, would they even entertain having 3.9 and 5.4 PFOA in our distribution system, which I know would mix and be diluted, so those numbers would come down drastically. But I don't know. That's just my thought. I don't know what to advise, but that's my.
I think
Don,
the next.
I think that about a year and a half ago, about a year and a half ago, we went through that exercise with our legal representation, Craig, as far as what an unofficial, unofficial, whatever, a referendum would do. And if I recall right, he pointed out that you kind of, I don't know, it was a little bit of an awkward situation to do that. Either it has to be a warrant article or you don't do it at all. There is really no such thing in between that doesn't put us in a weird spot, because if it's not a warrant article, then the vote doesn't really count, but it puts us in a position that we know what people expect and can like almost cause liability or something like that, or expose us to liability or some sort. So there was an awkward construct that he explained to us about a year and a half ago. So we definitely would want to have a conversation with him if we wanted to do something like an unofficial poll of some sort.
Yeah, you might be talking about when we wanted to send out a customer query to ask what their thoughts are about treatment, and it ended up just turning
Right.
into a customer petition warrant article.
Right. I think that's what it was. And I do
But
recall
there
that
were
he advised against
circumstances.
a poll.
There were circumstances with the Dowling litigation at that time
Right.
that may have been the cause of the advice at the time. So
Possible.
I don't know if that even is applicable at this point, but
Yeah.
we probably can look into that on the legal side of things, I guess.
Well, in the near,
Ironically, one of the things, and I don't know if this is something that, we could keep the way in on this, but, you may become one of the very few water utilities that have zero PFAS, right? I mean, with the treatment plants on all the systems, I mean, there are people in Pennachuck who would want to be on your system because they don't want to have 3 and 5, regardless of what the standards are. There are many, many people out there that feel that way strongly. So that is a philosophy, obviously that you may or may want to continue as the, maybe the gold standard of New Hampshire that says we have one of the few water systems that has zero PFAS and so forth. I mean, I just want to set that out because that's kind of the way I interpreted it in the last, in the last meetings that you had, and the reason why you've gone forward like you have done, which I think, I applaud you for doing that. But I just want to remind, that's not a bad thing to be known for. And certainly that's what your goal has been. So I just want to make sure that in going forward, and I get it, because the money is obviously is a driving force in how this works. And I think Keith and those guys have done a great job pulling this together. I just want to remind, because there's been a lot of conversation in the last 4 or 5 years as to what is the future of the water supply for Merrimack, and that was determined to be, our goal is to get as low as we can go. Bring the bar as as far down as we can possibly go, and that's where you are. And to your credit, that's where you're headed, and that's where you're going to be. So.
and historically, it was always the policymakers at the time were saying we wanted to do that with our own supplies too. We want to control, like Will's point, our own destiny. We wanted to do that way. So, all right. I think what I'm hearing is it makes sense that we'd be wanting to recommend and pursue at least getting a cost of service study advanced at some point. Maybe that'll be part of the next step in the capital plan. So I can see that as coming out as a recommendation here. And then you guys can decide what the timing is on approaching your users. But that certainly seems to be making sense. And then we'd have a pretty good comparison to the Pennachuck and the Manchester options against our own. That was the other reason why, by the way, we are sort of leaning towards sticking to what you have with Pennachuck and Manchester, because I think as an emergency connections, you still want those, you still need those. We used it this summer. And I think, on a short-term basis, people probably view that a lot different versus, having water or not having water, even though it might have a little bit of PFAS in it below standard. Because then you can manage when you use it. But I think I've got some guidance and direction on that, and we've got some guidance and direction on that. That makes sense. Honestly, Dawn, we didn't have much more. We threw a lot out here, but and I think I've got a lot out of what this discussion was. So, I mean, I don't have much more to present unless there's other questions and feedback or thoughts on what we're talking about and presenting here.
Keith, just to not to double too far back, I may have missed it when you were talking about the artificial recharge inlet. Ron said he wanted to put as big of an inlet as possible, just in case in the future if we wanted to visit surface water. And then you said you currently on here have it as just the normal, as we're gonna need for standard AR. What's the price differential if we wanted to go with a larger inlet?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up again, Paul, because we're trying to, we carried the cost to support the AR. I didn't carry the cost to do that long-term needs. Let's just say we decided we wanted to be able to withdraw 6 million gallons. That's not costed here. We could take a look at it. I haven't done it. But what I said was, if we decide we're going to do this, there will be a decision point because it's cost effective for AR. Then there's going to be a decision point where the district will have to decide, do we want to build it just for the AR today, worry about the future later, or make that, let's say, $3 million additional investment or $2 million additional investment to make it good enough for us for 100 years. That'll be that decision will be made probably when we decide we're going to be building an intake. But for the comparison points here, just to be able to equal footing on all the other options, we kept it to what was needed for the AR.
Okay.
But I will tell you, if you're going to go to the effort of spending $5 million, we're probably going to want to spend a little bit more to make it big enough for something we might happen in 50 years or less.
I agree.
All right, so you think you got everything you needed for direction from us on the final report at this point?
Well, almost everything, but we got enough.
Well, if anything
No,
else
it
comes
does.
up,
It's helpful. It's helpful for us to know that where we're headed, and because if even if there's not a lot of reaction, I feel like we're heading generally in the right direction. I got some redirects here based on your conversation, and that's super helpful. And we'll be talking about it again.
yeah, and I think you covered all of the alternatives that we asked you, from what I can tell. I don't see anything big missing that we asked you to cover.
And I will probably remind me of this, but we do owe you a little bit of a view of what it looks like if we recommend or wanted to go to chloramine system wide. So that wasn't directly related to source options, but it is something that we'll be giving you some feedback on.
And not just that, but in general, one of the biggest complaints that we face now from consumers is the chlorine smell and taste, and that
Right.
is something that is pretty loud at times. And I don't know if the team at the office has ever really mapped out who is complaining. If that is only I'm saying, if that is only people that are close to any of the chlorination points, right? Or is it a general issue all over the system? I have no feeling about that, no opinion about that. I have no information about that. But it is something that comes up pretty often, right? And I kind of hate that we're spending millions of dollars here for filtration systems to come up with, as you said, one of the cleanest waters in the state, at least as far as PFAS and so on goes, and anything else that GSE takes out of the water, and green sand. And then we have people complaining about chlorine and saying they're not using the water, not drinking the water because it tastes and smells like chlorine. That kind of doesn't sit well with me. So we had talked about possible decentralized chlorination instead of the central chlorination we have right now at the wells, to avoid those long stretches of distance that the water travels, and therefore higher chlorine levels we need at the beginning of the distance, right? I also know that some people have concerns about the residual substances when chlorine binds with other substances in the water, and that they have also some health impacts possibly. So there's a couple things that come together where I'm thinking, okay, we should try and get that looked at as well, and whether that is chloramine or chlorine and decentralized chlorination, whatever it is, we should look at that.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting what it is. I know Lorraine Allen keeps pounding that in my brain, but my brain's just not good enough to remember those details.
You're
Probably
talking about the disinfection byproducts, right?
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
I hear those questions as well, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, the good news is you're a groundwater source, not a surface water source, so it's less of an
Right.
issue. But
Right.
yeah.
And I have to remember that too. You're right. But in general, like I said, I just hate that we have that we are making substantial investments, and then people complain about chlorine, right? And don't drink perfectly safe and healthy water because we have some chlorine smell in it. That's not satisfying for me.
Okay.
All right, I see we got Ken on here. Ken, when did you come in? Just a few minutes ago? I just noticed you now.
Yeah, just a couple minutes ago.
All right, good. Thanks for showing
No problem.
And if you want to make a note of that, it's 4:40 right now, so he was probably on around that time.
I thought you were going to say, if you want to make a motion to adjourn.
No. No, I think, is that all of what you wanted to cover from Underwood's
Yeah.
perspective?
I am, unless Mike or Luke, we had anything else, and Jamie, I don't know if you had any updates, but yeah, I think, unless those guys do, I'm good.
Yeah, I think we do want to hear from Jamie. I just didn't know if,
Up as we talk, but we don't need to go into those now.
all right.
So action item is that you guys are going to look into that cost of distribution study, whatever it was called.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Cost of service.
cost of service. What we'll do, Wolf, is I think, we'll work towards finishing this report. I see recommendations coming out of this report sort of in a sequential way. And one of the first steps probably would be say, let's, what I'm hearing and actually not hearing in here are good news. Like, let's stay the course with AR and Mitchell. At some point we have to decide there's a capital project to go forward with those. So we're going to start laying out our recommendations. But as one of the first steps, I think, based on these conversations is let's do a cost of service study. Let's stay the course with the projects that we're doing internally, because there's a preference, at least based on the information we know today, that that's the way we want to go. If we learn something new with Penachuk based on a cost of service study, we'll have time to adjust. So I see our report wrapping up with sort of a roadmap of these steps for you. So I wouldn't say that we're going to jump right in to say let's call Penachuk and get one, but I think when we issue our report, then that'll be the basis for proceeding down that path.
Okay, and the other action item then is the inquiry with Penachuk whether or not they have any plans to go to chloramine, right?
Yeah. Okay.
What's your target for completing this report? I'm sure you're not going to have it done for our next meeting on Monday.
No, it won't. I mean, I don't think it'd be unreasonable to think we'd be close in January, February at the latest.
Okay. Ron or Jill, you have any questions or anything? I didn't want to jump over you guys if you had something to ask or anything. Just
All set.
okay.
No, I'm good as well.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's good. That's helpful. I think you guys are on the right path. I appreciate all the work that you've done. Looks like you're really pulling a lot of numbers together from different sources, and you got all of the alternatives that I believe we asked you for. So I appreciate everything you've done, and wrapping it up into a final report. I'm looking forward to it. So great.
Very good. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. All right. So I think we're on the agenda. Are we all the way down to number 3 down there, or I think that's everything above that was covered.
Yeah, the only one I didn't cover, and I'll probably do it at a future one. We have some stuff on the water audit and things, but it's up to you. But I don't have a lot to report other than I think maybe some stuff that'd be worth sitting with you at the next meeting. But
Okay.
that's the only thing we didn't cover. But we can do that later.
All right. Okay, sounds good. So I guess we're at GZA update on whatever projects. Obviously, well 9 I think is the big one. So whatever else you have to cover, Jamie, I think you can have the floor at this point.
I think that's it. I'm going to, I'd like to, can I take the screen for a second?
Yeah, don't leave, Keith, because you're gonna kill the meeting.
Yeah, don't do what I did.
You're muted, Keith.
Somebody should unhost me, I guess. But I won't. So he can share, but I won't leave. I'll stay.
I won't be very long.
You probably have to pass the host on to Jamie.
Yeah.
Make Jamie the host.
Okay.
No problem, right?
Is there a
3, 2,
button for?
1. I think right-click on Jamie's profile picture or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is that how it works?
Oh, make host. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to change the host? Yeah, I do.
There you go.
Now you're the host. I passed the baton, Jamie. It's all you.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah, it says, and I don't think that's the real way to do it, but
It worked.
as long as Jamie doesn't leave, it works.
Pressure's on now. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
rocks.
Rocks, there you go. So as you know, we're drilling currently out of 9. And this, we started about a week and a half ago, and these guys have made incredible progress. We're already down to 64 feet as of today, and they might have made a little more progress. But what you're seeing is this esker deposit that we hit. So in those bags, we're typically looking for sand and gravel. But as you can see, what we're seeing is cobbles. That's insanely good from the standpoint of, productivity of the well. Look at, these are the cobbles that have come out of this well down at 64 feet. I'm going to continue to scroll down. Can you see this? There's another one of these rounded boulders that have come out. This is a water-worked round boulder. It's an esker. It's ice contact deposit. So you had right off the edge of the ice when it was melting, you had high velocity waters that were just creating these incredible size. This is the trunk of the car. And again, these are some more. These rocks are just insanely good. You can't even, I've done this for 40 years, and this is probably the 3rd time I've seen this. So this is like the best of the best for construction. It makes it hard to construct a well, but it makes the geologist very happy that we actually got the right spot. I think the good news is that we're making good progress on it. We haven't broken any equipment in there yet, but we're continuing on, and we'll continue on drilling until the end of the year to get this thing built. So I consider ourselves quite a bit ahead of schedule, because I wasn't really thinking that we would get this far this quickly. But I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, because things can go wrong quickly too. So that's kind of the scenario there. In terms of the report, Dan has been working on that. I still haven't seen the near final draft. So I'm guessing that it'll be, our goal was, I was hoping that I would have it to you by the meeting on Monday. Kind of doubt that will happen, but hopeful. I really would like to get this done before Christmas. So Don, if you want to review it, it might be your Christmas present to review over the holidays, and then we'll submit at the beginning of the year for the preliminary. And then at some point, I do need to come before the board to change and modify our contract, because if you recall, we did our pumping test. It was kind of a preliminary pumping test in the work order we have now, and we've changed the way we're doing this to go to a full-scale pumping test. And that will be based on comments that come in from DES from our preliminary report. But I just want you to be prepared that in January, I will be coming before the board to make a modification to that contract that will be based on what we submit. So that's pretty much it from our end. I do think I did want to just mention that the salt mitigation meeting that we had was really well received. I have had a number of people respond to it in a very positive way. I still see too much salt being added to the road, and I think the next step for us is that Sean O'Keefe, who was one of the contractors, I think we need to put a committee together that includes a couple of people on the ground besides ourselves. Get Kyle Fox involved in this, and get Sean O'Keefe involved, get a person from the commission, preferably a commissioner, get Ron or Jill involved in this committee, and myself, and then have a DES person, and have a discussion. The next thing would be a discussion to take this to the DOT and get their, continue to push. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about pushing. And Jill and I talked about getting in contact with the landscaper that had expressed an interest to participate but was not there. Jill, I don't know if you were able to get a hold of him to see if you want me to call him or talk to him. Or-
No, I was able to get a hold of the landscape, the maintenance company that put down the salt, and have had a couple discussions with him, but we need to go directly to the maintenance company itself, not the contractor, because they're the ones that are creating the liability. So
Right.
That's our next step.
Okay. So I think, I don't know what you think about it, but I do think we should put a formal committee together now. And I'd like to get, I probably should send you an email with the recommendations of who those would be, and then, and see if we can get that started.
Okay.
And what are you thinking, like having regular meetings or?
Well, I think we need to have, at this particular point in time, I want Sean to be our hero out there pushing this with the other contractors, because he's willing to do that.
Yep.
And he wants to go to Brine. He's actually he wants to build a storage facility for Brine. And if he could get the other contractors to buy in, that would be, we would get other people engaged in this. And, and I think there are enough people. I think Fidelity and others would be interested in participating in this as well. So I think we got some momentum, and we got some, we really got some play out of that. And I thought it went as well as we could. And the state is ready and willing to try to support us. And I think it's just a matter of just continuing to bang on their drum. That's what we got to do every time. We got to bang the drum.
Yeah,
So,
I definitely agree with that, Jamie. I'd like to promote that meeting as much as we can. And, whatever publicity we can get out of it, if we can contact the participants. And I still am not sure exactly who was there, because I just had a bunch of names, but in the maps that were sent out just had like parcel numbers. So I wasn't able to tell what businesses were represented there. But if we can make some kind of a list, I'm assuming these people that attended, find out if they would object to us publicizing that about who attended. And, it would make it look like a positive thing for the community that these businesses are attending the SALT study webinar that we had. And I just think the more of that we can do, the better off. And there's some other ideas I had about the one gray area that I still have is I still don't fully understand the differences between where there's low salt routes and there's no salt routes. And I still don't know where those are in town. And I'm almost thinking at this point, does it make sense for MVD to take that task on? I would like to sit down and figure out, where do we think it makes sense to apply salt, and where does it make sense to apply limited salt and then no salt at all? And if we need to go around and work with the town to put signs up, because I know there are signs around town, but it seems like it's very limited signs. I know there's places where I cross the wellhead protection areas that don't have signs, and then there's other places where it seems like I'm in the middle of the wellhead protection areas, and there all of a sudden there's like signs that pop up. So I'm sure we haven't done anything with these signs for probably, I don't even know if we did anything back in 2012 with this posting of signs and things, but I'm sure a lot of those signs might have been knocked down, or I just would like to get that next action covered. And I don't know if the town is, I think it's their authority, but I think maybe we should be the ones that are kind of driving it maybe. And
yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, the town, it is their authority. And I think, Don, it would be really good if you could go and have a almost one-on-one with Kyle, you as the chairman, or someone else with the commission.
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, Jamie. I did get your email, Dawn, and I haven't yet, but I am planning on getting in touch with Kyle. I can do that sooner than later. And him and I probably can just take a drive around and see where things need to be or supposed or are, what the current conditions are, and
Tomorrow might be good because of the storm.
yeah, maybe he would tomorrow as well. Yeah, I'll give him a call tomorrow morning.
Okay. And I
Yeah,
know I'm jumping the gun on this a little because I was going to bring this up at Monday's meeting, but since we're talking about it, I just figured I'd bring it up now so you know people are aware and maybe have time to look into it before Monday's meeting. So I appreciate that, Ron.
Yeah, and I think if you then could meet with Kyle and with someone at the town, because I think it's going to have to be both Kyle and the town, and say, okay, we've had this meeting. You guys have participated. You've seen it. You know how important it is to us. We've identified the sensitive salt areas. Everywhere in the sensitive salting area, we need to reduce salt load, period. How can you help us to reduce the salt load in this area? And I I think that's the simplest message that we can give them. They've got the maps. They see the data. What can you do? Tell us, what can you do? What can it be? What can happen? And I think that just the conversation alone will continue to keep it pressed in their brain. It's kind of like, I don't want to say this, but it's kind of like a parent telling their kids to study, right? You got to study. Yeah, I got to study, but you got to study. You know,
And maybe one thing we can offer is almost like an audit, you know, together with Kyle. After an ice and snow event, we offer that service to have one of our guys go out and audit the property and point out the excessive salt load and why it is excessive. And the other option would be to also point out the savings that a contractor can achieve by not overloading, right? I mean, salt costs money, and I can imagine that just the cost savings alone are something that's gonna motivate people to listen to these ideas.
yeah, and Jill did a good job in taking those pictures too. She took a bunch of pictures in the last little storm that we had and took it right to the contractor. And you know, I think that's what we I agree with you. Well, that's what we have to do. We absolutely need to do that. So, well, Ron, if you set that up with Kyle, that'd be great, and it'd be good to see. And then I think if Don can follow up with a meeting with you, Ron, and Kyle, and maybe one representative from the town. And I don't know who that would be, the best person from community development or somebody. But
I'm almost wondering if it'd be like town manager or something.
it'd be great to have the town manager.
Yeah.
That would be ideal. Yeah. But so that's it for my end, and just wanted to tell you it's encouraging. This well 9 is encouraging. So
Great. Jamie, is Barry actually out there, or is it one of his workers that are out there?
well, he goes out there periodically, but he's got a couple of other people that are out there, right? So before I forget, I'm going to stop sharing. And I guess I'm going to have to do this in a different
Back to
way.
the door, I think maybe.
Stop sharing. Okay, and I'm going to give it to you.
Make me the host?
Jamie, I got a question for you on the somewhat of a, whatever you think is a tentative schedule for that well 9, because I need to add in some kind of verbiage into our special conditions of that project. Mainly, you know, so we're gonna have the contractor estimate a certain horsepower or, you know, horsepower of the pump and capacity in gallons per minute of a pump. For that, and I also want to give them a time, you know, some sort of a timetable to say, hey, we will let you know what the final capacity of that pump is and all this kind of stuff. And we have to tell them to hold off on certain work until that well has been approved by the state and that type of thing. So are you still planning on doing your pump test in February?
Yeah, that would be our goal.
Yeah.
But I may have to give that, which might mean that I'll have to get a price change for that pump test before January. But February. Yeah, it would be in February.
Yeah, and then when do you estimate? I know it's just crystal ball estimating, but when do you think you would get this the approval from the state on that?
Oh, well, that's a public hearing process. You know, I've got to go through those scenarios. So it would be, you know, I'm hoping by the end of the year.
Oh, it'd be that far.
Well, if we got to go through 2 public hearings, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Now, if we don't, you know, that bumps it up 90 days. So,
And
yeah.
when will you know that if you don't have to go through the, 2 public hearings?
Well, as soon as it goes to, they have to have, once the preliminary report goes in, it gets basically sent to all the neighboring communities. And then they have, I think they have 45 days to request a public hearing. And then they request a public hearing, the questions go in, the state has to respond to them. It's not like Hampstead or other towns where there's been really a lot of engagement with the neighboring communities, because there were some issues and concerns that people wanted to address. So I'm hopeful that we don't have to go that route, but I never can guarantee that. So yeah, let me do this, Peter. I'll get back to you on the schedule of when I think we're going to get this well done, drilled, and when you will be in a position where I can be doing the pump test, and then kind of lay that out for you. Best case scenario.
Okay, yeah, because if we were gonna tell the contractor, we had a separate bid item in the contract right now is for well number 9 work, at all type of thing, inclusive. So we were gonna tell them to hold off on installing the water main out there, ordering the VFD and all this kind of stuff. And if we wait to the end of the year to do that, it's gonna sort of affect the schedule of when
Sure.
we think the plant will be online there.
Well, we'll need some discharge pipe. Remember, we want to run the discharge out past well 2 for the pump test,
Yes.
if you recall that. Yeah. So
And I
that's
know
gonna be,
you were, and you were working with Ron to get that coordinated, I believe, right?
right.
Yeah.
We will be. Yep. So give me a little bit of time. Let me see how those guys do tomorrow, and I'll talk to Barry and see what his thinking is on how soon I could get this done.
Yeah.
And what's your meeting time in January? Would be, well, the 18th is Martin Luther King Day. Is there an
Right.
alternate date?
The following Monday, both January and February were the 4th Monday instead of the 3rd.
Okay. All right.
And then Jamie, in terms of finishing the drilling, because we want to just take our GPS unit out there and shoot the top of the casing of your well. When do you think Barry will be actually done doing the drilling itself?
Yeah, I'm going to find out. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm hoping by the end of the year.
Yeah. Okay.
But he's got development to do. I mean, you can probably shoot it while they're there, right? Once the casing top is on.
Yeah, I figured once they get the drill rig out of the way, and we can set up we can shoot top of that once the drill rig's out of the way. So
Yeah. Okay.
okay,
Good.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Jill, do you have control? I can't. You're muted.
Did you click on, no, it's still showing as you. Did you click on participants and then
Participants. Okay.
down at the bottom?
Yep. Then what?
Then hover over my name and then click more.
Okay.
Oh, is it more?
And I'll make you the host.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. You should be the host now.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Never again. I feel so bad.
Although I think this time we're actually ready to adjourn anyway, so.
Oh. Rats. I thought I was doing something positive.
Good, we appreciate that, Jamie. I don't know, any last questions, or if not, then we could probably move along and adjourn. Just want to remind the commissioners there's another separate meeting after this with legal, I think, so don't forget about that. And I think we're pretty much right on time for 5 o'clock on that one, so that's great. Thanks for the information, everybody, and I really appreciate the time and effort to put into this, and thanks for coming and taking time out of your day for us in the afternoon like this. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, guys.
And Dawn, I have one other thing for Ron. There's a planning board meeting tonight that I'm just presenting the well 2 project on. And we do not have to get approval, but we're just going through the same thing that we did to 4.5 and just presenting it.
Yeah.
So that's a 7 o'clock meeting, and our project's like sixth on the. I think we're last on the agenda. Is actually what we are.
Okay.
I didn't know if that was anything that you wanted to.
I can be if you need me there.
No, I don't think I do. I just didn't know if you wanted to be there. I just want to give you the.
So that's virtual, right, Pete? Or
Yes,
that
it is. Yeah.
virtual?
I can give you the login information if you want that.
Yeah. Can you send it to me?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it. If no one else has anything else, I think someone can make a motion to adjourn, I guess, at this point, right? Thanks, everybody.
Ken, do you want to have the honors? All right, I'll move.
Adjourn the meeting.
I was late too. I was stuck in a meeting at work, so I'll move.
All right,
Seconded.
motion by Wolf to adjourn, second by Ken. We'll do a roll call. All those in favor, we'll start with Wolf
Aye.
and Ken
Aye.
and Paul
I vote aye.
and myself, aye as well. So the meeting is adjourned, and thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys probably on Monday, I think, for the meeting.